Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap. This is going to be an exceptionally intelligent conversation, I think, and very insightful. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of today's event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience, so we do encourage you to please, if you have a question, don't hesitate. Just go ahead and use that question and answer tab right there on your interface and submit the questions. And we will pepper them throughout the webinar as they come in. Hopefully we'll be able to get to your question. And we also have a very, very interactive chat feature. So we do encourage you to chat out your questions, comments, suggestions, whatever you want to share with us. We'll be more than happy to take it. Just use that chat interface there. And we also have a handout for you in the handout section. So please, at your leisure, you can go ahead and check that out and download it. And then at the end of today's webinar, we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you will be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Optimizing Jenkins for the Enterprise. Our speakers today are Darren Pope, who is a developer advocate at CloudBees, Mark Waite, who is the Git plugin maintainer, and probably another title along with that over at CloudBees. And finally, we have Tyler Johnson, who is the solutions architect at CloudBees. And as you can tell, they're all raring to go. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being on today's webinar today. I'm going to take myself off camera, put myself on mute. I'll be back around when questions come in and for whatever else you might need for me. But Darren, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Charlene. Yes, Mark has many titles. If we listed out all of his titles, the webinar would be over before we finished. So we're not going to do that. And Tyler, let's just put it this way. Tyler's a sales guy. So let's sort of see how this rolls today. Because sales guys, we don't talk about sales guys. All right. We're here to talk about Jenkins and the enterprise. But before we get into thinking about the enterprise, let's just talk about Jenkins. Now let's start as a user. Mark, you and I have had this conversation many a time. How many people do you think that the scripted syntax that's in a Jenkins pipeline is a real programming language?
A dismaying number, actually. So, okay, one of the common mistakes that we find amongst our users is they have the hammer and nail behavior, where they think that because they've been given something that's a Turing complete language, the scripted syntax it's a programming language. It really is, and they treat it like one. But that's a problem.
But it's not.
Right. Well, but
it is, but it's not.
Exactly. It's a programming language. Yes, that's an accurate statement, but that's not what it's intended for. That's not why we have it there. So careful how you use that thing. It's not general purpose. It's not supposed to be general purpose.
It is meant to be, fill in the blank,
a domain specific language. And that the words domain specific language really have a very, very key meaning in this case. They are domain, in this case, continuous integration, continuous delivery, specific, and a language that expresses the concepts for that. People make a terrible mistake when they instead treat it as something more general purpose than it is.
Can we count the number of times we've run into issues with that?
Oh, it's dismaying how many times, because it's very common for people to see this thing for the power it has. And it is quite powerful. It has flow control constructs. It has looping constructs. It has parallelism. It has serialization concepts. It really is quite a powerful programming language. But the problem is, if you put things into that programming language, that's the thing that must execute them. And that's one of the common mistakes that people make, is putting too much into that programming language that they should have put someplace else in their development environment.
Because guess what? Anything that you write that's scripted syntax runs on your Jenkins controller. Period. End of story.
Well, and sometimes people miss the fact that you said the word controller and they think, oh, that runs out on one of my agents. No, Darren said the word controller because he means controller. And it really, there's a single execution entity there, that Jenkins controller. Yes, it will send the compilation phases. It'll send all sorts of other things that I do. Shell scripts that I run happen on the agent. But pipeline execution runs on the processors of the controller. So if you've got 100 users and they're all running pipeline, that's 100 things that are trying to run on a single controller. That's not healthy. That's not a good thing.
Yeah. Now, one of the other things that we see a lot is people say, okay, I need to do this thing. And instead of maybe dropping down to an SH or a BAT or a PowerShell step, which you do those three, those will run on an agent. Anything inside those blocks will run in an agent. Instead of doing that, if they have administrative privileges on the machine, or even if they don't, they'll talk to the administrator and it's like, hey, I need this plugin. Look, just because a plugin exists doesn't mean that you need to use it.
Yeah, one of the patterns that people developed over the 10 plus years that they were using Jenkins before we had pipelines was they had to have plugins in many cases to do the task they needed to perform. Oh, I need to copy files from my workspace over to some other location. I don't know how to do that, but if I can find a plugin that does that, that's better. But with pipeline, it's cleaner, simpler, and easier to do that in a shell step or a batch file step or a PowerShell step, because as a developer, I can now run exactly that step on my desktop to test it. And that step now executes in the agent, not executing on the controller. So there are lots of reasons why plugins are very helpful if you've got a lot of freestyle jobs. They are, but really, the majority of Jenkins jobs now are not freestyle. So if you've got a lot of freestyle jobs, that may indicate it's time for you to consider how do you make the switch to pipeline.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, you said something during that I'd like to kind of pull on, which is less of a technical, but more of a human issue when we talk about heavily scripted pipelines. And you said cleaner, simpler, and easier running to declarative. Even if you're the best scripted pipeline writer in the world, and I've gone through many heavily scripted large pipelines to decipher that, you may not always be the maintainer and architect of that pipeline. Someone may need to inherit this, and you're building a wealth of technical debt for the team that comes in behind you when you have heavily scripted complex pipelines that then they need to maintain going forward. And that's just something that I like to talk about when we're thinking about how do we build for future success as well.
Wait, you're saying people actually change jobs?
They do. It happens all the time. We see it, and it can be very painful when you're not following these best practices. If you're heavily laden with pipelines that are scripted and plugins.
I haven't seen that happen in the past 2 or 3 years. I don't understand why you're saying that.
Well,
okay.
Darren, I want to take off of Tyler's comment a little bit to remind people that the language that you implement your application in is probably chosen by your team as an effective way to do that thing. Mm-hmm. And by that implementation language is probably also a strength for many of the people in your team. When you switch to scripted pipeline and use a domain-specific language that's dedicated to doing Jenkins pipelines, you're narrowing who's got the knowledge. So better typically to keep the knowledge in a commonly understood language for your entire organization, rather than saying, oh, I'm going to do something exotic in Jenkins because I know Jenkins. And Jenkins is cool. I love Jenkins. It's really amazing. But keep it in the language that your team understands, because it helps them help you as you care for that as it evolves.
Yeah. And Darren, how many times have you heard someone say, that's our Jenkins person, or that's the person that writes the pipelines? It's not, that's the team. It's always an individual somewhere.
Yes. I'm trying to do the floaty away thing. Or what is that? Homer Simpson falling back into the bushes, right? That's what this moment is. Yeah. If you, it's good to have that type of person around. But with what Mark was saying, look, if I need to write some sort of CLI, if what I need to do is a long batch script and it gets too weird, maybe I just write a CLI. Here's the thing that's really nice about writing that little purpose-built. Don't try to rebuild the whole thing in a single app. You're going to have other issues. But if you write that one little purpose-built thing, you're using a real programming language, going back to what we were just talking about a few moments ago, that has a real testing framework available to it that you can compile into a native binary. Think Graal VM, which makes it simple. Or if you're using Go, you can cross-compile. There's lots of ways to do it in 2022. And then you can take that binary that was produced, run it on Mac, ARM, or Intel, Windows, Linux, how many different flavors of ARM, Raspberry Pis, whatever. You have that binary, and you just take that binary and run it anywhere you want to. And then from a Jenkins pipeline perspective, or please forgive me, Mark, even a run a shell step inside of a freestyle job, I can run that binary because I could have it available somewhere on path and just run it. I tell you what, if people don't listen to us all the way to the end, and by the way, you have to stay to the end because as Charlene said, there's 4 $25 gift cards coming out at the end. If you don't listen to anything else today, if you're constructing your pipeline, Jenkins pipelines today, or just in general, your Jenkins jobs, and you have tight constraints on the internals of Jenkins, meaning you're tightly bound to plugins, or you're still using freestyle jobs, which by default is sort of tightly bound to plugins. If you can get to where you're writing your Jenkins pipelines as Jenkins files and storing those Jenkins files, this is the other big thing, inside of a Git repository, or if you're still using Subversion, I'm so sorry, but it'll work with that too. Mm-hmm. And as long as that is all outside, and then your configurations within Jenkins are just pointing at those things, your maintenance for that is going to be much better. And you don't necessarily have to have the Jenkins person around to do those things for you, at least from a user perspective.
Right.
I agree. And you brought up a very painful subject there. We're talking about testing in the CLI. And I hear all the time, how do I test my pipelines? Or how do I do this in Jenkins? And what does that tell you when someone says, how do I test my pipelines in Jenkins? What do you immediately think?
Yeah, my thinking is that probably means they've got more code in their pipeline, in the pipeline domain specific language than is especially healthy for them. You put logic into your pipeline that you want to assert that the logic is correctly executed. You probably want to push that logic one level lower into the programming language that's familiar to your team, the testing framework that's familiar to your team, and allow local execution of that thing by anyone while they're doing development without requiring that they run a Jenkins controller to execute their pipeline DSL.
Now, we could ramble about this user side probably all day long, but users only go so far because in a well set up Jenkins controller, it's probably not set to anonymous. If your Jenkins controller is anonymous, you might want to rethink some life decisions. You want at least to tie into some sort of authentication. In most places, that's LDAP, Active Directory. Maybe you're using SAML because you're using Okta, whatever the case may be. But now you have Jenkins administrators. So we've talked about users. Let's talk about administrators. And with administrators, usually what happens is they receive a JIRA ticket or a remedy ticket or some other ticket that just wants to go make them go cry. And it's asking them, I need you to go install this plugin. I need you to set up this environment variable. I need you to set up this XYZ. And again, they go over in the corner and weep for a while before they pick up that ticket and decide to figure out if they're going to do it or not. But unfortunately, with most administrators, they don't have that choice to decide whether to do it or not. They just have to do it. And what does that mean? Log in, point and click, reboot. Everybody enjoys doing that, right?
Nope.
There's silence, just silence.
Not me. Not me. That's nope, not at all. I've done that enough. I liked doing it when I started. I really did. It was a great way to get started. It really helped me. And I found it very fluid at the time. I was so delighted that I could configure things with the user interface. That was really a treat. But after a certain amount of time, it was no longer a treat, right? It was no longer, oh, this is fun. It was more, oh, this is sort of mind numbing. And I've done this before. I learned what I could the last time I did it.
Anything you want to add to that, Tyler?
No, I mean, I think, Mark has been a longer user of Jenkins than I have been, but I'm sure in the earlier days when it was less complex and there was less plugins out there and there's less you could do with it, the UI was probably a little simpler to use. But now that it's become more complex, it's been a more powerful tool. These are good things. The way that we manage it should also evolve as well.
It should. But maybe it's gone on for so long. We've talked about the Jenkins person over time. People do leave companies, then the next person inherits the Jenkins controller, and another person inherits, and another person inherits, and continues and continues. And now you have this Jenkins controller that's grown massive. We call those Jenkinsteins. That's one of the names. There's other names that we cannot repeat. And if you're in that situation, don't feel bad. You're not the only one. But there are ways to help manage that. Now, one of the things we were just talking about is configuring that controller. I need to set up a shared library, do some environment variables, tie into LDAP. One thing that was introduced a couple of years ago is JCasC, or Jenkins Configuration as Code. Right? Yes, that's how we do it. And with JCasC, you can install a plugin. Yes, I know we talked about plugins before, but this is a plugin that's meant to help specifically for the Jenkins internals, right? That's its purpose in life. And you can generate whatever the configuration is out, and then you can, if everything goes well, again, there are 1,800 plus, Mark, correct my numbers if I'm wrong,
That's
1,800 plus plugins. Not all of them are CasC enabled, not that you need to be installing all. Look, if you have a controller that has all 1,800 plugins,
ouch.
We won't go there. But let's say I will say, because of how I've run my Jenkins controllers, I run 2 long-term controllers. And if I have to install more than 1 or 2 extra plugins, I've done something wrong. That is different from, what is it called? Install suggested plugins when you're doing a fresh installation. Right? That's just my gut feel. Now, Mark is a little bit different, because as a plugin maintainer, and the way he slices and dices and does changes for his Jenkins controllers, the way he runs his life, Mark, you probably have realistically in the order of 10 to 20 extra plugins.
Oh, at least, because I maintain, you figure I maintain 7. And therefore, I'm hesitant to maintain a plugin I don't have installed. Therefore, I have a number. But even there, Darren, to highlight the point I think you were making, that I don't commonly install a lot of additional plugins over the set that I've identified to meet my needs. And I still have evolving needs. I have things that I need to do that I didn't need to do yesterday, new challenges, new things, new problems I have to solve. And yet, oddly enough, my set of plugins continue to meet my needs, because I can almost always solve my problems without having to add more plugins to the payload of plugins that I have. Right. Now I like managing my plugins specifically with automation, but in terms of adding new ones, back to the story we had earlier, there is rarely a case where I find that I need to add more plugins in order to solve my problems.
Correct. And I sort of went down a bad rabbit trail there. We were talking about configuration as code, and saying not every plugin has configuration as code support, but probably the top 500 easily do. If you had to guess, that number may be too high. Top 300 probably.
The plugins I maintain, the plugins that I use in my set, almost all of them support configuration as code. And that's a pretty common thing, right? Most of us use the most popular plugins, and the most popular plugins, thankfully, also are commonly enabled for configuration as code-based configuration.
Say that 5 times fast.
Yeah, sorry. That was terrible, wasn't it?
So let's assume for a moment we've installed the configuration as code plugin. Yes, there's no special code name for it. It's configuration as code. You've installed it. You've exported. The Jenkins YAML comes out of it. Yes, it's YAML. We won't go into that one either today. Is that the only file that one produces?
It does produce a YAML file, and that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, the example is YAML.
So then we have the YAML file. It's got all the configurations for that controller.
Mm-hmm.
But just the configurations. What it doesn't have is the plugins. Like a nice list of the plugins. But wait, there's more. There is a project under the Jenkins umbrella called the Plugin Installation Manager. And it gives you the ability to define the plugins that you want to install. If you've worked with Jenkins for any amount of time, you may be familiar with it used to be called install plugins sh. Was that the script?
Yes, it was. And the next generation of that script is this Google Summer of Code project that the community created called the Plugin Installation Manager tool. And it now uses all the logic that Jenkins has inside of it to do plugin dependency resolution and plugin loading, and understands update centers. It does much smarter, more sophisticated things than that old script that we used for the longest time. Yeah.
So when we marry JCasC with the Plugin Installation Manager tool, we've got a lot covered, but we still don't have everything.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the jobs. We don't have the jobs. Now what?
Yeah. So the challenge there is, okay, like you said, Darren, I can configure the administrative settings, I can actually define credentials from configuration as code, but I don't define jobs. I can define plugin versions and plugin choices from Plugin Installation Manager tool, but then I've got to do job configuration. Then there are several different ways to do job configuration. Right now, one of the most popular is the job DSL. I actually use a different configuration technique myself.
Oh,
and in any case, we've got to do storage of the job definitions.
Okay, let's go down that rabbit trail. What do you use for your job config? Come on.
So I track my job configurations by just keeping copies of the config.xml files for the jobs in a Git repository. And it works quite well for me, actually. Now, I admit it's not nearly as elegant as job DSL, but I've found it works better for me personally because it's a controller that I manage and I know and I understand it. It's easy for me to keep those files in the Git repository.
So job DSL is an option. Mark's option, which is using the config XML and then using the Jenkins CLI, I would assume.
Actually, in my case, I store them right in the ref directory. So it's not even using CLI to upload them. But
even better,
that or Jenkins Job Builder, there are several different ways to do job definition automation. And CLI could be used to do it. Any one of those. The challenge is I need to be sure that I can represent my job definitions in a source control system that will help me recreate that thing later.
And what you just said there is key. And it ties all of these three things together. I want to be able to define the state of my system in source control. I'm not going to get into the arguments of Git versus Subversion versus Fossil versus Mercurial. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
We want it in source control somewhere. So I can do that with JCasC. So that gets the config in my server.
Yep.
I can do my Plugin Installation Manager text file. I can't remember what the
text file or YAML, you get to choose.
Text file or both. Yeah. So you do that. And then whichever flavor of however you want to do your jobs.
Right. And now maybe but why would you do that question? And I can tell you the why I manage my system as configuration as code. I want the ability to test drive changes in a safe location before I put them into production. And by having my configuration represented as code, I can trivially spin up and tear down a configured instance that I can use to do some throwaway testing. I have the confidence that if something goes wrong, I can also go back in time thanks to having a source-controlled history of what changed where. So for me, configuring the system as code is a benefit even for me as a single user. And I cannot imagine running a system for a team without this kind of facility because things just break far too readily if I don't.
Hey guys, we've gotten a couple questions in, and I certainly don't want to interrupt the flow here, but I thought it might be interesting to kind of mix it up. So we got one question that says, what if you need to integrate with a new application?
Good question. I like that. So I'm gonna spin my answer, and I'll let Darren and Tyler give theirs. A new application usually means there's something coming online somewhere in the company that needs to be told how to do its work, or needs to be taught to do something. And quite commonly, that thing I'm trying to interact with has an interface. It's either a command line interface or a REST API or something that starts it and stops it. And those kind of things, each of them is readily done by using the REST API facilities that I can call from a command line, or by making a command line call from a shell script or a batch file. So choosing to do a higher level integration where I've got something that's dedicated to Jenkins oftentimes will actually cause me more pain than just doing a command line integration and then calling it from Jenkins. Now, Darren and Tyler, you may have different experiences than mine, but for me, that's been my experiences. When I've got a new thing to target, I try to find the command line or the communication layers that I can talk to that don't actually require Jenkins, and I'll use those as my first choice.
Yeah, I think you're pulling on the right thread here. Something that we were talking about earlier, right? Use that CLI, use that inside of like an SH or a BAT or a Bash shell, right? Inside of a step. Offload that work to the agent, keep it away from the controller. And you can see immediately where Mark's head went was to proper architecture in Jenkins, rather than what's my first step? I'm going to search the plugin ecosystem to see if I can find something to integrate this with. That wasn't where he first looked. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah, we got a couple comments. One of our audience members said, totally agree with that, especially with upgrades to the integrated app. So there we go. We also have another question, unless you guys have any final comments on that one. Okay, here's the other one. Do you have an example of the JCasC plus PIM in GitHub or somewhere else?
There are many of those examples. I've got examples. Gavin Mogan has examples. Darren, I believe you and probably Tyler have examples. I mean, most of us, for instance, my configuration is managed in a public repository for that parts of it that are not sensitive to credentials. So absolutely, many of us manage our configuration as code in public repositories or in hybrid public-private repositories. So yeah, there are several. That might be a good thing for us to provide separately later, is some links to interesting locations where they could see examples. Good suggestion and good question.
Yeah. All right, that's it. I'm going to go back off camera. You guys do your thing. Thanks.
So we've talked about how Jenkins can be wired up and be managed as code. I'm not going down the rabbit hole of GitOps today. Did I just say that word out loud? Because most of the time when you do things to Jenkins, not always, but there's always a high probability that something might have to be rebooted. Mm-hmm. GitOps sort of falls apart at that point. So let's not go there today. There might be a conversation for a later day. But we've talked about configuring the controller, the plugins, the jobs. But man, I am going to have to do all that myself. Like they were just asking, hey, is there a repo that's got a sample of this? Even if we had a quick link that we could give you at the moment, that would be super unique to our situation.
Right.
And it may not conform to your organization's, or even forget organization, it may not conform to what you want to do. So then you have to still figure out, okay, how do I want to do this? What have I told you? There's a way that you could take this. Instead of having you to roll it, you just pay some money and it's all working, right? Oh, wait, I'm not the sales guy. Wait, that's Tyler's job.
That's right.
Sorry.
Cue me in there.
Okay, look. Tongue in cheek, we're joking, but not joking. So with CloudBees CI, Magic Hand Wave, all that goes away. No, it doesn't go away. You still have to do your work. But it's not 3 separate processes you have to manage. Within CloudBees CI, there is configuration as code. We call it CasC, not JCasC, but CasC. because our configuration as code solution builds on top of JCasC. So that at the core of that, you still have JCasC, but there's extras there. Plugins are included. And now, as of, Tyler, help me, month before the last?
2 months ago. Yep.
2 months ago.
Items for our jobs.
Items are all covered now. So
That's right.
now you get...
Wait a sec, that word. Did you just say the word items, really?
Items,
I love that. Okay,
Well,
that's a Jenkins object model reference. Could you tell people what items are?
What is an item?
Yeah, what is an item? Okay.
No,
Items
Tyler,
are...
that's you said it, Tyler. So
I'm sorry.
You gotta do it.
Okay, yeah, we'll flog Tyler on this one.
Okay, very fair. Very fair.
What's an item? All right, I appreciate that. I happen to know the Jenkins object model well enough to understand what you just said, but I fear other people may not.
Right. So in our definition, right, in a CasC bundle for CloudBees, our items.yaml is going to control things like jobs. And that can take the form of freestyle or pipeline or multi-branch or org level jobs or project, whatever it is for Bitbucket, all of those sorts of definitions. It can also define things at a folder structure level as well. So if I want to start breaking down teams or different disparate jobs inside of a controller to a folder level, I can also define those in a YAML file as well.
So an item is a Jenkins thing, like a folder or a freestyle job or a pipeline job or a matrix job. And you've got the ability to define all those things as code in this single solution that is configuration as code for CloudBees CI.
That's right. Yep. And it's going to live right alongside the exact place where the open source JCasC, which again, as Darren mentioned before, we inherit from that as a part of the CloudBees configuration as code. And then we also contribute back to it as well, where we can have our plugin configurations, definitions of agents, credentials can be stored there, some unique branch identifier strategies when we're talking about how we configure the jobs, and then also some really cool like specific Kubernetes and container management configurations. They all live in a file like that. And then alongside of that, we have our plugins. We can have a plugin catalog, which allows us to define the appropriate version of said plugin to be installed. And then we also have an RBAC file. And these all live right next to each other in one clean YAML manifest. So it's very easy to interpret. It's very easy to manage. And I think one thing that we're talking about from the open source perspective, and Mark's doing it with the JCasC YAML, you can use the DSL or the XML for the jobs. You can use YAML or TXT for the plugins. But Mark is one person, and he's managing it for himself. He is not an enterprise. He is not a team. He knows exactly what he needs to do. It's much more difficult if you were to do this and push this out to a larger enterprise. God forbid you have multiple Jenkins instances. What if not everyone's standardizing on the way that they choose to define these?
Whoa, stop. Are you saying people don't standardize their Jenkins instances within organizations?
Well, not only that, do they even standardize the way that they're using the items, Darren, inside of a Jenkins model?
Continue, Tyler.
How often do we see a smattering of teams using freestyle jobs, heavily laden with plugins, and then others using scripted and others using declarative?
Well, and those are all valid paths on your evolution, right? I mean, there were years ago when freestyle was the best choice you could make.
Wait, Mark, and it was the only choice you could make.
Oh, wait a sec. That's therefore by definition the best choice. Of course, it was the best choice because it was yeah, fair enough. It was.
How long's the pipeline been around?
2016.
16. Yeah.
15. No, 15 was when it was introduced. Declarative came in 2016. Ballpark? Does that sound right, Mark?
Yeah, I don't remember the years, but that sounds about right. 16, 17. Yeah.
And how old is Jenkins now?
16, 17 years old. So it was 15 2 years ago. So it should be 17-ish now.
Right. So
a long runway of just
pipeline. There were almost 10 years of just freestyle. Thank you.
Right. And many administrators arrive in a new responsibility where they're given a Jenkins controller that somebody used before them that happens to be business critical. Oh, it's doing this very precious thing, and they've got all sorts of challenges, and their first task is understand it, comprehend it, upgrade it to current, etc. So there are lots of reasons for people to consider the transition from freestyle to pipeline, and the transition from not managed as code to managed as code. And those we're all in transition. We're all in evolution continually, right? And so no shame if you've got freestyle jobs, but good thing to move forward on.
There are still super valid use cases for freestyle jobs. Let's be clear with that.
The shameful things some people say. Oh, that's great. I like that. Yeah, I have several freestyle jobs in my definition. I have to admit it. I do. They're fair enough.
Well, okay, but Mark, you have to have it because you're writing and maintaining the Git plugin, so you need it because freestyle exists.
Correct.
I don't know from a business perspective. I can't buy that, Tyler.
And that's you've got a good point. But I think, Darren, your point, I would frame your point differently. It is, you should use freestyle projects if you must, but that's the question, if you must, right? And pipeline defining the job definition in code makes it easier for teams to manage. It allows them to self-decide how their pipeline will execute and what it will do. Whereas if the job definition's in a freestyle project, it's a different place that they have to go in order to reconfigure it. So much better pipeline. Pipeline really, there's a reason the majority of Jenkins jobs now are pipeline. So join the majority in this case and make your transition from freestyle to pipeline as well.
It's time. I'll just say it. It's time. Now, we were talking about CasC, at least from a CloudBees CI perspective. It's not just that it's all nice and in one place and managed as a whole. That's part of it. And of course, there's other things with CloudBees CI, like you get the CloudBees Assurance Program, which tests plugins and the versions of those plugins all together with a specific version of a controller. You know, all those things are extremely useful, but it all boils down to being able to have support. And if you are the Jenkins person within your organization and you don't mind working every weekend, then great. That's your life. But I imagine most people don't enjoy working 24/7 or being on call 24/7 for 6 years. Not that I'm by it or, hurting about it or anything. But what do you do? Well, with CloudBees CI, if you have this supported infrastructure, that as long as you've actually installed it correctly and you have worked with support to make sure everything's golden, then when you have a problem, you've got support to help you out from CloudBees. That's where you fill in, Tyler. Come on.
Yeah, I'm with you. And then I want to kind of extend that out to even more advanced topics of like, when should you start to scale Jenkins to multi-controller as well?
But before we do that, if you're still here, don't forget, we've got 4 $25 gift cards coming up at the end. Okay. Talk about extending that out some more.
Yeah. I mean, earlier we were talking about plugins, and you mentioned the Jenkins Stein or the Jenkins monolith. And plugins, while we want to stay away from them where we can, sometimes they do fit and they are inevitable, and they should be deliberately installed where needed across controllers. And that's a good idea of where you should start to split up and run multiple Jenkins instances, because we're not all Mark, we're not all an individual. You may be supporting dozens of developers, hundreds of teams even, where we see really large install bases. So CloudBees allows you to run at scale, and with these configuration as code bundles, you can now create base bundle definitions. You can inherit those so that you are deciding a tree of configurations that can be inherited by all downstream bundles that can then extend those capabilities, right? That's where the specific, most deliberate use cases of those plugins are now installed and stored in those children bundles. Whereas the baseline definition is what we call a parent bundle. And the way that we do this, and we are able to maintain all of these bundles and all of these Jenkins controllers, is through an operations center. And that's what we call essentially in the old architecture, a master was what controlled Jenkins. We used to refer to it as the master of masters, right? It controls all of your controllers. And from there, you can now define, those shared tools. You have the ability to also configure that operation center as code so that you have this distributed network of Jenkins controllers, but you don't lose control over how they're being maintained or how they're being leveraged across your different teams.
So I like what you're highlighting there, Tyler, is that the modern enterprise is not a monolith. The modern enterprise is not everybody does exactly the same style of development in every team. Modern enterprises very commonly have, oh, we're the team that does the Android app for the company. Oh, we're the team, a different team that does the iOS app. Oh, we're the team that does the web backend. We're the team that does a web front end. We're the team that does this other. And each of those teams may have, in fact, slightly different needs to meet their continuous integration and continuous delivery needs. So they are probably today in some enterprises, each maintaining their own Jenkins configuration that has their own very unique set of capabilities. And what you highlight is that having something that can help facilitate the delivery and reliable support and care and feeding of each of those teams is very valuable for the modern enterprise, because I don't think we're ever going back to the enterprise as single development technique or single development language. We've long since passed that. Modern enterprises are all over the place for their languages that they use, for their tooling that they use, and I don't think it's going to change.
And Darren, based off of your professional services experience, what happens when you see all of those teams like Mark just defined, dog piled onto a single Jenkins controller? Because I can tell you some of the things that I've seen, but I'd be curious to see what you think.
This is not magic. This is explosion. I will put it this way. It can work. It can work. But it's rare that it actually works. And the reason why I say that is if everybody that is living on that controller, think of it like a high-rise apartment building. My sister used to live in downtown Manhattan in one of the towers. You go up to the top of that thing swayed. No, thank you. If everybody plays by the rules, right? They don't put 6 rolls of toilet paper down the toilet and fill up the pipes and do all the other things, then that building is going to be a fresh running building. The analog here with a controller is everybody using the pipeline the right way. We have a minimum number of plugins on the controller. Everything's working fine. I have seen controllers that have had anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 jobs defined and reasonably active on that controller and not have a problem, which is way out of the norm. The thumb in the air is what, 500 to 1,000 jobs at most on a controller. Right? That's sort of you're probably okay. I've also seen controllers that had less than 25 jobs on them blowing up all the time. Right? So it's not necessarily that it's always this massive thing. It could be a small one that's just in a really bad way. There's one thing I forgot to bring up earlier. Not to completely. Some people may not know who CloudBees is. Right?
Right.
We're losers. We forgot to say who CloudBees is.
We should explain who our employer is. I like that.
Yeah. Okay. Tyler wants you to do it because you're the sales guy and you probably have that script down in your head.
Absolutely. Yes.
I don't.
So CloudBees has been around for over a decade now at this point. And we started as the enterprise sponsors to Jenkins, which is why we have such great people like Darren and Mark on board that work here. We offer an enterprise version of Jenkins, but we have evolved from there to include a vast array of more well-rounded tools in our platform that encompasses the entire software delivery lifecycle. And as a part of that, we define it as CI/CD with our enterprise Jenkins, release orchestration, which we have within CloudBees CD, and now we've expanded out into the realm of feature management. How do I start to define different types of users or environments and segment those out and both add kill switches into my release process, but also get meaningful, impactful feedback back to my developers to see, is your feature being leveraged as effectively as you think it should be? So this is an all-encompassing suite that's continuing to grow. We're moving into the world of compliance and how do we actually bridge the gap between Jenkins expertise, which I see all the time. We're building artifacts really quickly. CI is going really well, but in fact, it's not landing in production systems at nearly the same velocity. And that is where we bridge the gap with release orchestration and feature management. So that's where we fit. We are an orchestration engine from the CI world all the way through the production world of release orchestration.
I gave you too much rope. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
I should have scoped you a little tighter.
That's
okay.
what I do.
Hey, that was a great, well
it was
done,
great.
Tyler.
It was great. And it's well, but here's what I do want to say. CloudBees CI at its core is Jenkins.
Mhm.
So at the time we're doing this live, tomorrow is a release of Jenkins LTS, whatever the number is. It's one of the weird numbers. But also tomorrow will be the release of CloudBees CI, that at the core of that, at the GUI center of CloudBees CI, is going to be Jenkins LTS. Right? So it's not something brand new and we're trying to figure out how. No. At the center is Jenkins.
Absolutely.
So everything that you're used to working with in Jenkins is there, plus. So that's the part. So if you're just using Jenkins today and you have a small team or you're a developer of 1 to 5, CloudBees CI might not be your right fit right now. Right? It may not be. But you might need to be learning how to better use your Jenkins controllers and how to run your jobs better. And this is something that Tyler does, and parts of the teams within CloudBees does, is they have these workshops that happen every, what's the time on that, Tyler? Every month?
They happen every month. That is correct.
Okay.
Yep. And our next one is the 17th and 18th of this month.
Okay. And what would people learn in that? And it's like free, right?
Absolutely free. You can show up. We normally like to budget about 2.5 to 3 hours for it. And we're going to show you some of those plus features that Darren's talking about in the CloudBees platform. And it's largely centered around our discussion today. What's it like to administer Jenkins, and what's it like to be a Jenkins user? And again, if you've never seen CloudBees before, but you are a daily Jenkins user, you come in, it won't look very different. It's not meant to look or feel very different. There'll be some additional things that you see, but largely it should be familiar. And the job that you're running today could easily run on a CloudBees controller as well.
And just to make it even more clear, when you go to log in on CloudBees CI, what does it say, Tyler?
At the very top now, it says CloudBees CI.
No. What does it say
Oh,
on
it
the
says
login
welcome to
screen?
Jenkins.
It says welcome to Jenkins.
Welcome to Jenkins.
So that part should still feel familiar to you if all you've ever used is Jenkins. Now,
Well,
I work on both sides of the thing. So I like Tyler is mainly on the CloudBees CI side, and Mark is mainly on the Jenkins side, and I go on both sides. But Mark, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No. I think you were going exactly the same place I was going, Darren, which is that the hybrid is very healthy for the Jenkins community because the Jenkins community benefits from CloudBees contributions. CloudBees benefits from Jenkins community contributions. We've seen both sides of those benefits and are very grateful for them, right? It's a win for both the community and for CloudBees.
It absolutely is. I'd echo that exactly.
Okay. Let's see. I can't really tell if the questions that are there. Charlene, do we have anything else live? If not, I actually have a couple of things that I want to bring up since we have about 12 minutes left.
More questions in right now, but I'm keeping an eye
Okay.
on
Got
both
it.
the chat and the quick question and answer. So we have about 12 minutes, 13 minutes left till the end of the webinar. So
Got it. Thank you.
go on.
So if you do have questions, go and put those questions in. Again, before we wrap up, there's going to be 4 $25 gift cards being given away by Charlene. So don't hang out till then. If we were to try to figure out, okay, I've got this Jenkins controller and I'm having a lot of problems with it. Where should I start debugging it? What is it? Do I look at logs? Do I look at, what is the very first thing you should look at? I actually have an idea of what the very first thing should be.
I'm open. Go ahead. What's your first approach?
Log into the dashboard, the homepage, scroll all the way down to the bottom and look in the lower right-hand side.
Oh, Darren, you have no shame. Oh, that's what you just highlighted is the first challenge is I'm running an outdated controller. Is that what you're saying?
And this
That's
is something
exactly
this is something that I thought Darren would say earlier when we're talking about dogpiling those teams. The number one thing I see when there's a lot of plugins and a lot of teams they are almost never on the latest release of either open source Jenkins or of CloudBees.
It's not even the latest, like within the past 12 months.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Okay. So
because it works, I don't want to touch it.
Right.
And that's not a great position to be in long term.
Well, but because it works, I don't want to touch it. oftentimes is echoed because I can't duplicate the thing elsewhere. Back to our story of configuration as code, if I can't duplicate it elsewhere, I can't test an upgrade either. So it's a good motivator to say, okay, I want to get myself configured as code so that I can experiment with things in a safe environment before I apply to production. Yeah, I see your point. Good observation. And I accept that one. Sorry, I had missed it. I think always about being on current, but you're right. The reality is many controllers in the world are not running anything even nearly close enough to current.
And let's define current just for this specific conversation as current LTS.
Right.
Let's not talk about current weekly, because weeklies, if you're running a weekly as your primary machine, you're brave. You're really brave.
If you're running a weekly, you need to be upgrading weekly, because the Jenkins project, just to be very blunt, the Jenkins project supports with security fixes LTS and current weekly. So if you're running weekly and not upgrading weekly, you are endangering yourself that you won't be ready. If there is a security fix that comes out for Jenkins core, you're not ready to install it. You are therefore exposed. You don't want that. You really, if you choose to run weekly, and it's a fair choice. There are things you get by running weekly, but if you choose to run weekly, you choose to upgrade weekly. And if you say, I can't upgrade every week, then the answer is you should probably choose LTS.
And I'm going to tread lightly here, but you brought up security reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're running your Jenkins controller inside of four walls, no internet connectivity, you're actually downloading it, putting it on a floppy drive, and then walking it. Okay, nobody has floppy drives anymore. But you're walking it in and installing it. If you're still on a network, just because you think you're safe doesn't mean you are. If people are using your network, you're at risk.
Right. Read some fun stories about things like Stuxnet. There are all sorts of stories about things where people thought they were secure. And this is not a specific Jenkins story, but rather a general story that air gap is really great. It really is. If you need to secure, air gap is a really good thing, but it's no guarantee, because every so often stuff crosses the gap, right? So honor the security advisories by installing Jenkins versions that have security advisories fixed.
And as new security advisories come out for Jenkins LTS, at the same time, in a coordinated release, CloudBees CI also releases security releases. So, and it's in lockstep with what's happening with LTS, because CloudBees CI is based on LTS, not weeklies. Whew, I'm so glad for that. So in looking towards a couple of years, I did say the GitOps word, but let's assume I didn't say it for a moment. Let's fast forward 3 years ahead. How do we run our Jenkins infrastructure?
Well, so we're already running our Jenkins infrastructure very much cloud oriented and scalable, with elastic resources that come and go, right? Agents that appear and disappear, allocated by a cloud provider so that we only pay for capacity we use. And I assume we're going to get more and more of that we're going to continue being very much dynamic, that we'll allocate stuff when we need it and deallocate it when we don't. Is that sort of what you were angling at?
Yeah. Jeremy? I mean, that elastic and saving money. I think the saving money thing is the key part.
Right.
I mean, really, as developers, do we really care about the money? Unless I'm the manager managing a budget, no. If I'm the frontline person writing code, I probably don't care about the money. I might be interested, but realistically, I'm not. Now, Tyler, from the sales side, do we want people spending more money just because? I don't think so. I think we want people to spend the right amount of money.
Exactly. You don't want to be spending it on cloud compute, to Mark's point, right? Everything's going to become more and more ephemeral. It's already there when we see it with agents. We have the ability to also do that with controllers now as well, where they can spin out. They're only leveraged when they're needed. And then I also see more advanced strategies popping up all the time where people are evaluating cloud costs across providers. So having this manifest, or the ability to have all of your configuration as code, now becomes a portable object. I can move this from cloud to cloud when necessary if I want to redeploy. And really, I see that as a more advanced strategy that's going to be popping up more and more over the next few years.
That the case that you're saying there is roughly a disaster recovery scenario, but it's not just disaster recovery.
No,
you've gotten the email that you hope that you never receive that, yeah, I know that we're on current cloud provider A, but now we're moving to cloud provider B, and you have 2 months to do it. Have a nice day.
Right. And how much easier does that become to consume when you are leveraging things like configuration as code?
Right.
And either Mark's way or the CloudBees way, either way.
Yeah, it's either is fine, but as code is going to be the key part there. You need to have that config.
We've even seen that in the Jenkins project, where now our motivation to be multi-cloud has been a different motivation because the Jenkins project operates thanks to donors. And sometimes the donors change. And when the donors change, we may get donations from one cloud provider or another cloud provider. And we've found that we need to be multi-cloud aware in order to readily move ourselves from cloud to cloud. Now that's not a business reason, right? Many businesses can just say, we're just going to pay them whatever price it is for cloud provider X.
Right.
But inevitably, configuration as code and configuring things as code can make it much simpler to do a transition that can be quite terrifying and dramatic in some cases when you're switching cloud providers. So yeah, I think configuration as code is a great way to be prepared for those kind of surprises and get all the benefits of experimenting with new upgrades, doing exploratory work without damaging production. Those kinds of things are real benefits that you get short-term in addition to long-term safeguards if you ever had to do a cloud transition in the future.
So if we had to wrap it up with this, everything needs to be code. The configuration of your controller, the plugin configuration, your job configurations, and the jobs themselves, right? We talked around it, but to be really blunt with it, your jobs should be pipeline jobs in some way, shape, or form, whether that's pipeline, whether that's multi-branch or an org type job, because it all boils down to pipeline. And then those files, those Jenkins files, should live in a source controlled repository. And then from there, in theory, you can transition around. Hopefully you never get that call that you're moving from one provider to the other. But as Mark said, the Jenkins project runs off donations. And sometimes those cloud providers change and those donations change. So being able to move quickly, the only way it can be done today easily is via configuration. So with that, Charlene, we hand it back to you. Thanks for having us today.
Oh, absolutely. Hey guys, thank you so much for this brain trust around Jenkins was just so informative, and I am sure that the audience got a ton out of it. But unfortunately, we only have about 2.5 minutes left, so I do need to wrap up the conversation. I do thank everybody who did submit questions and comments and was a part of the conversation as well. Just a quick reminder that if you missed any or all of the webinar today, you will have the opportunity to access it again. Even if you just want to listen to it again, that's awesome too. We will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be on the devops.com website. So you can go look for it there. Just go to devops.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Okay. Also, just another quick reminder that we do have that handout for you. If you would like to download it, now's the time if you haven't had a chance to do it yet. And before we do close things out, I did say that we would be doing those for $25 Amazon gift cards. So please, without further ado, let's take a look at the winners. We've got our first winner is Brian F. Congratulations, Brian. Our second winner today is Ashley O. Congratulations, Ashley. Third winner today is Fiona D. Congratulations, Fiona. And our fourth and final winner of the $25 Amazon gift card is Kuldeep S. Congratulations, Kuldeep. We will be reaching out to all 4 of you via email to get your Amazon gift card over to you. So please do check your inbox. And if you don't see it there, please check your spam folder. Darren, Tyler, Mark, thank you, all three of you again for such great information imparted during today's webinar. I got a lot out of it. I know the audience did as well. So thank you again for your time and your expertise.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. I do want to thank the audience also for joining me today. And this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.